You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
What if you've spent your entire career warning the world about the dangers of artificial intelligence, but you are the eminent scientist and entrepreneur now leading the AI race? And that is the central dilemma of Demis Hassabis, Nobel Prize winner, co-founder of Google DeepMind, arguably the most consequential scientist alive, and a man who, by his own admission, may not be able to control what he has created. Our guest today has spent 3 years in direct conversation with Demis to understand him. Sebastian Mallaby, a 2-time Pulitzer Prize finalist and the best-selling author of the investment classics on venture capital, hedge funds and central bankers, chronicling the people, but critically more than anyone else, getting to the purpose and paradoxes behind their actions. His new book on Demis, The Infinity Machine, is an instant New York Times bestseller and the most important account yet written on the AI race. During our conversation, Sebastian helps us understand the process and purpose behind his own work, the leaked documents, the therapy-like sessions, the truth of why DeepMind is in London, not Silicon Valley. He provides context and philosophical insights on what the rapid technological change could mean, the AlphaGo moment, the innovator paradox of Google, and the question that haunts everyone building at the edge. Are you steering the technology, or is it steering you? This is the Sebastian Mallaby episode. Sebastian Mallaby, welcome to High Net Purpose.
Great to be with you.
So you've spent a career chronicling exceptional people, from venture capital to hedge funds to central bankers, and now arguably the person that's building the most consequential tech in human history. We will get to Demis in due course, but before we go there, have you managed to articulate your purpose?
My purpose? Well, these are big questions. So I guess I worried intensively about my purpose when I was young. So between, let's say, 15, when in a cliche, I read, Camus and Sartre, and was told that, existence is absurd, and we don't really have a purpose. And in revolt and rebellion against that, I started being determined to have a purpose and sort of, find something which I thought was going to make the world better. And then that kind of evolved into, right, you also have to mesh with what you yourself are good at, what you find to be your comparative advantage. And so I suppose over time, what I decided was that in a complex, sophisticated market economy with huge division of labor, many things which are important for human advancement are going to be done by somebody because there's a market signal to do them. And you can't, as one person, aspire to, making the world better is just this huge thing. And it's way too large scale. I think you think large scale when you're reading these existentialist books when you're 15. You then realize that you're one individual and, lots of things are worthwhile. You could, be working in industry, producing some products that clients use that make them more productive themselves. That's worthwhile. Mm-hmm. Almost by definition, if there is a market demand for a product, it's worthwhile. You can debate tobacco or something, right? There are some things with negative externalities, but fundamentally, most things are worthwhile if they are rewarded in a market economy. And then there are some things which are maybe under-rewarded by some metric like nursing or teaching. But anyway, I kind of backed off the sort of big picture, how to make the world better, and focus more on things where I thought I had a comparative advantage and that I found personally satisfying. And it ended up that, journalism and writing was that thing, and that understanding complex human events that have an effect on lots of people and sort of trying to democratize the understanding of that. Initially, I wrote at the Economist magazine after leaving Oxford. And then I was a columnist at the Washington Post. I began to write books. And I think kind of just spreading the word, spreading the understanding, sharing the joy of ideas. It's some way from the original quest for purpose that I had when I was 15, but that's what I've done.
But in being a historian of economics in some ways, does any of that link to anything else that you're trying to understand or explain? You grew up in a household of prominent diplomat, etc. Was that also there circulating where your interest naturally went?
Yeah, I think that through my father's diplomatic career and my mother being French, and part of my childhood being abroad, I came to feel that traveling was sort of an important part of an exciting life.
Yeah. And then you've set yourself the task in the books that you've written, particularly the more recent ones, of going into highly complex areas and dealing with people who've got deep understanding of those areas. Again, is that something that you sort of were drawn to, that complexity, to be able to explain it in a...
Yeah, I think both because I enjoy complexity, I like getting my mind around something a bit challenging.
And then on the human side, how have you managed to get into these rooms? Because quite typically these people aren't very accessible.
Mm. Look, I think you have to be patient and respectful. And I do a lot of homework trying to understand everything about somebody before I go and see them. Every time they've appeared on a stage at Stanford and been interviewed, every time they've done a podcast, anything that's out there, you want to have digested all of that, because it does two things. First of all, when you see somebody, you're not making them repeat stuff they said before. You're pushing for new things, which will add to the public record. And second, it impresses the person you're talking to that you've done all the homework, and they're more likely to trust you if you're asking sophisticated questions that push them out of their normal discussion range. It's not out of their comfort zone, but it's, all of us, I think, have, a set of talking points that we wander around the world with, and we're very used to rolling them out. And then there's a deeper self, which you just, for lack of time, in most conversations, you don't get to that. So if I show up and I go to the deeper self, people are surprised, they're impressed, and they enjoy it. I mean, I was on the stage last night at a big venue in London with Demis Hassabis, the subject of my new book. And he was asked by the moderator, there were two of us, Demis and me, plus the moderator. And the moderator said to Demis, "Why did you spend more than 30 hours with this writer, Sebastian Mallaby?" And Demis said, "Well, I didn't think I was going to, but, we started talking and, he asked interesting questions that made me understand the path that got me to where I am and illuminated the path ahead. And it was healthy for me and enjoyable for me to go deeper and be more thoughtful about, you have these sort of crystallized views of, I did it because of such and such. Like Demis says, I built a deep tech company in London because I thought there was lots of unexploited deep tech talent in London. The real story, as I've pointed out to him, is that many of the early people he hired at DeepMind were from Canada or the US, or they weren't from London necessarily. And the real reason he stayed is that emotionally he's British. And I think he enjoyed having that pointed out to him, his own self-narrative being amended. It's valuable to people. I sometimes say, when I'm talking to somebody like Alan Greenspan for 80 hours, for me, it's research. For him, it's therapy.
Because you've said that before, that it was almost like a therapy for him to spend the time with you.
Yeah.
In how? Just in terms of how, because you're asking questions that are pushing them to think more deeply about their actions and...
Yes, that's right. And I come at it with more preparation and perhaps sophistication than most people do, right? So I have read everything they've done. I've really thought deeply. I've talked to, dozens of their colleagues, friends, rivals who give me a 360 on them. I really try to understand these people as deeply as possible. And so for the subject at the center of the story, they're learning new things about themselves.
And there's, I don't know whether you choose folk with this sort of shape, but Greenspan had that sort of Shakespearean element to what happened, where he knew, but he couldn't actually stop it from happening. And I guess we'll get on some parallels with safety, etc., in AI later on. But with the selection of who you're writing the books on, is there an element of looking for that there's some central paradox, or there's something within the power that they control which they can't really control?
Not really. When I go into subjects, I don't yet know them deeply enough to know if there's going to be that sort of paradox. But I would say that I know, just as a student of human nature, that, of course, everybody's complicated. Inside most of us, there are 2 or 3 different personas that come out at different times as sort of competing for dominance. If you look at an AI leader like Demis, on the one hand, he's a scientist who wants to advance science with AI. On the other hand, he is a humanist. He wants to make society better. And on the third hand, he's just an ultra-competitive, fierce guy who wants to win. And at different times, one of those 3 entities is winning. And everybody's like that. We're all like that, right? And by the way, I've just realized something. So your first question, Joe, was, how did I think about purpose? And I didn't really have a very crystallized answer. That shows you my point, that we're not very good at looking at ourselves sometimes. And it takes the interviewer to force me to look at myself.
Okay. No, I get it. And going back, though, to when you first met Demis and you sat down, and people talk about, the density of his mind can be slightly overwhelming when you meet. What was your first experience like with him, and did that view that you had of him hold, or did it change over time?
Well, one of the first meetings, not absolutely the first one, was casual at a tech conference, and we just chatted a bit. And that was before I even had the idea of writing a book about him. So I knew him a little bit before. But one of the early meetings when we were getting serious about me doing this book was a dinner. And he said, look, before you come, there's a couple of books you should read. And one of them was a science fiction story called Ender's Game. And in Ender's Game, there's a sort of child hero, a boy who is trained in intergalactic warfare and saves the planet Earth from invading space aliens by wiping them out. And he literally saves the human race. So I read this and I think, is Demis telling me he's saving the human race? Is that the message here? Because it's kind of a pretty bold claim to be making to somebody who's going to be writing a book about you. Wouldn't you want to be a little bit more modest and cautious about, sharing that? So I go along to this dinner, and he says, I feel as though I'm on a mission like Ender, and this is kind of a depiction of me.
Wow.
And I gave this book to my wife so she would understand me better, he said. And annoyingly, she sympathized with Ender because he was a young boy saving the human race. But with me, she thinks I'm an adult, so I don't deserve the same sympathy. I don't like that. But, that's how I see it. And so, the sort of extreme ambition, not to say Napoleonic, messianic ambition of Demis came across. And I kind of was processing that. And I thought, well, one could condemn that and say that's just absurd. Or you could say, not totally out of line with what you're doing. If the attainment is crazy high and the ambition is crazy high, there's kind of a, okay equilibrium. And, points for honesty.
Because his awareness around holding that as his sort of view of who he was and what you needed to do to understand him, that to him was just purely natural, and this is who I am.
Yeah, he just put it out there. He said to me, look, I read the biographies of people like Isaac Newton, and, they failed. Didn't understand all of physics. Didn't understand the full nature of reality. I want to do better than that. That's why I'm building AI, so I can really understand the fabric of reality. Because, Isaac Newton didn't do it. Whoa, you're going to be better than Isaac Newton. Okay, but, perhaps he will be.
Because what I thought was interesting in the book where you talk about Peter Thiel when he was, he said he had an A for science, but an F for business model.
Right.
But he was what they called an authentic entrepreneur, that he had a real desire, something was compelling him on a particular challenge. Is that what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, this is a man who actually, as a boy, Demis Hassabis, conceived this ambition to build powerful AI. And this is crazy, right? He is 17 years old. It's 1993. We are 19 years away from when AI could recognize a cat. Like, AI couldn't do anything. It was the AI winter. The consensus was AI has failed. And he decides he's going to build powerful AI. And he keeps to this mission from the age of 17 all the way through, like 15 years later, he founds DeepMind. And then, DeepMind is founded in 2010 when still AI is doing nothing, but he doesn't stop him. He raises money and he goes ahead. So that sense of like this, yes, he is an authentic entrepreneur because he had this need to develop AI, to crack the deep mysteries of science, and nothing was going to stop him. And the company that he founded was just the vehicle to get him to where he existentially needed to be, discovering AI. That's what Peter Thiel means by authentic entrepreneur.
Because Golden, Escher and Bach and some of the books that he was reading when he was younger sort of seemed to form his thinking of that the mind is maybe not unique and it could be more physical in nature than people, even though he did go and study neuroscience and everything afterwards.
Yep. Correct. Yeah, I mean, Gödel, Escher, Bach, the central message, this is a Pulitzer Prize winning book from the 90s. The central message that Demis took away was, what the mind can do. If the mind is a system like a computer with essentially 1 and 0 signals being passed around through the synapses, then one day a computer that also passes 1s and 0s around will be able to do what the mind can do. And so AI is, by definition, possible. The existence proof is the brain.
So when you're putting together the books and the stories, do you almost find yourself in the role of a psychologist trying to put this together, what the drivers were behind these behaviors, etc.? Because we talked before we came on about Greenspan and in his 30s having the sort of life where he was buying a big Buick and all the rest. Is that part of what you need to do in order to either make the story stick or to try and understand the person more?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by people. I want to understand them as deeply as possible and as fairly as possible. I'm really not into, cheap shots.
Because you also spoke to Mustafa, Suleiman, who's a strange co-founder, and Geoffrey Hinton, who fears for human survival. So what did the critics and the doubters teach you that maybe the conversations with him didn't reveal in itself?
Sure. I mean, Mustafa Suleiman is probably the most interesting of the two. He knew Demis because he was the closest friend or one of the closest friends of Demis's younger brother. So he even had a job when he was young, part-time, teaching in a school that Demis's parents ran.
Okay.
So a close family friend, got to know Demis, and then through that connection, when Demis was founding DeepMind, he had a scientific co-founder called Shane Legg, but he wanted somebody who would sort of do, help to write the business plan, go find the office, negotiate contracts with the support staff, whatever it was, kind of do all the stuff that he didn't want to do as a scientist. And so this was Mustafa. And Mustafa had dropped out of Oxford. He's very, very smart. But culturally, he came from this Muslim, quite modest background. And was abandoned by his parents when he was 15, which is a crazy story, right? His parents split up. They left London. They left him to fend for himself at 15. Imagine that. And then he's so clever, he gets into Oxford, but culturally it's not a fit. He drops out. So he has no degree. And here he is co-founding a company with 2 PhD scientists. But he's so smart and so driven that he becomes like the second most important person in the company after Demis. And is really Demis's, kind of almost Siamese twin type partner. I mean, super close for a long time. And then they have a falling out, and he gets pushed out of the company.
There's a few points where you talk about the temptation in what he was trying to build, and I think you used the word that is the deliciousness of the taste of the idea of what he could possibly build, but at the same time, he's realizing that the technology could cause harm, and then that gets into lots of comparisons with the Manhattan Project and how you can get this wrong, and that starts to not haunt him, but it's a big part of what he initially set out with his purpose with Google to create, which changed.
Yeah, so that's right. So, the first meeting between Demis and his scientific co-founder Shane Legg took place at a safety lecture, an AI safety lecture. And so preoccupation with safety was baked into their relationship from the beginning, even before they founded the company. And Demis's story is in some ways a Shakespearean story of kind of, longing to make it safe, doing all kinds of theories about how you could make it safe. For example, only selling the company to Google on condition that there would be a safety oversight committee, which would determine the deployment circumstances for AI so that the corporate board of Google wouldn't have a monopoly on that decision. That was in the negotiation for the sale to Google. And in fact, Demis turned down a higher offer from Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, costing himself personally quite a lot of money, because Zuckerberg wouldn't offer the same safety safeguards. And then later on, there was a whole fight with Elon Musk, who was chairman of the safety board, and then that didn't work, and Musk founded OpenAI in competition with Google, and so Google was fed up with these safety boards where basically you invite Elon into the tent, he listens to all your plans, and then he founds a competitor. Understandably, that annoyed Google somewhat.
Yeah.
And so then they don't want to do another safety committee, and Demis is like, no, that's the deal, you've got to do a safety committee. And he goes to Reid Hoffman and raises a pledge of $1 billion to spin Google spin DeepMind out of Google. And there's a 3-year fight between Demis and Sundar Pichai about getting more safety oversight. Otherwise, Demis is threatening to spin out. This is a whole story that nobody knew. It wasn't public. I unearthed it. I got lots of leaked documents from inside. Demis's lawyer tried to tell me I wasn't allowed to use them, but I did anyway. So
did that taint relationships at that point when you're starting to?
No, so I mean, I had a forthright interchange with the general counsel of DeepMind, where he said, "You're not meant to do this," and I said, "Well, if somebody leaks me material, they may have done something wrong, but I didn't. I've got this material now. I'm using it." And to Demis's credit, he didn't get angry about that. He accepted it, and I've done many books. And I've dealt with many people who have tried to threaten me, sue me, go to, like, I work at a think tank in New York, the Council on Foreign Relations, and there was one character who tried to get me fired from that. Look, I've been through it all.
Yeah.
This was actually quite mild. Demis was quite reasonable.
But so then going back to what was happening there, the central part of it was the safety side, where you started off with one plan and then that got. So was it just circumstances met, and he had an assumption of singularity and stuff like that when he did that initially, I understand, but that was time moved on and that sort of fell away?
Yeah, so there was this idea of the singleton. There's the notion that there would be one lab building AI and bringing it into the world on behalf of all humanity. And if you only have one lab, there's no race dynamic, so you can go cautiously, slowly, really test it before you release it and so forth. And obviously that wasn't going to work. I mean, I think it was naive of Demis to believe that it would ever work. Because when you have kind of the God machine, of course, you're going to have multiple labs in multiple countries that are just desperate to build it. There will be competition. And so starting with OpenAI in 2015, and then even more so when Anthropic was founded about 5 years later, and then Elon Musk gets in the game, Zuckerberg is doing a thing at Meta. You have this profusion of different AI players. You have lots of competition. So even if you make AI safe within one lab, let's say Google is very careful and makes it all safe, if there are 10 other labs, including some Chinese ones, which are not making it safe, you haven't made the world safer. right? So you need to have safety imposed by governments, which can force all the players to be safe simultaneously. And that kind of needs to be not just the American government, it has to be also China, because they've got a lot of good models there. And I mean, some ways, that's the, at the end of my Shakespearean story about Demis, all his attempts to make AI safe haven't really worked. The best he can do is do AI for science and accentuate the upside, which is huge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, AI for structural biology, the AlphaFold program he built that won him the Nobel Prize, unlocks lots of medicine, unlocks material sciences. It's going to be fantastic, that side of it, for humanity. So that's what Demis does do, and good on him. But the actual safety on preventing the downside, that is a government role. And we haven't quite yet seen governments take it seriously enough.
You've had an incredible exposure into these labs and met a lot of the key people around this industry. How do you feel at the moment in terms of our ability to be able to keep this under control and avoid the big safety risks?
Well, look, I think that both Demis and Dario Amodei at Anthropic are very serious about safety. I can't say the same for some of the others. I think in particular Sam Altman at OpenAI has proved over time that whenever he has a choice between being safe and accelerating, he does move fast and break things. He did release ChatGPT, even though it hallucinated a lot. He did go to the Pentagon when they had that fight between the Pentagon and Anthropic about the use of AI for autonomous lethal weapons. He did go to the Pentagon and say, if you can't work with Anthropic, I'm here to help you. So I think we're in a world where, as I say, individual safety initiatives by individual labs get undercut by the other labs that see the caution as an opportunity to overtake.
Yeah.
And so I think until you have government intervening, we're in trouble.
I saw you recently talking with Arvin at Perplexity and this competitive race that we have now, and you've got sort of David and Goliath between the size of spend that Google has versus others. But there's a recurrence of the inventor's dilemma in a couple of your books. Is this something that you really like as sort of a concept for how change happens and fast?
Yes and no. So I think you're right. If you ask the question, why did OpenAI release ChatGPT in 2022 when Google and DeepMind had similar tech but weren't releasing it? So it's partly that Sam Altman embodies that kind of release product, go fast mentality of Silicon Valley. But it's also that if you're a startup, you don't have reputational risk, right? You've got much less to lose. I mean, Google's whole shtick is that it organizes information and it delivers high quality information to users. So for them, releasing a model that hallucinated was a much more risky proposition. And that is the innovator's dilemma. But the other side of this is that one of the remarkable things of the period since ChatGPT came out is that the dilemma at the incumbent didn't stop them from catching up, right? Yeah. I mean, Google announced Code Red, or they say they didn't, but basically they did. And they merged the two labs, the DeepMind lab in London and the Google Brain lab in Mountain View, two different AI labs. They smushed them together. They put Demis Hassabis in charge. A business school professor would say, hey, mergers are very difficult. Culturally, they're very difficult. Look at that merger. That was 8 hours of time difference between the two teams of scientists. That was, two different cultures which actually had been competitive and rivalrous towards each other. You had the guy in London, Demis, trying to run the Mountain View team. The whole thing, I think, the standard business school view would have been mergers are difficult and this one will be very difficult. And it wasn't difficult. They made it work. And 2.5 years later, they have a model, Gemini 3.0, that beats the OpenAI model on the leaderboards. So the innovator's dilemma didn't hold.
It didn't hold, and for now, we'll see what happens next. But so his leadership capability must be phenomenal as well, right? He's a scientist, but his ability to be able to get people to collect around a cause and move it along, or does he hire exceptional people around him to fill the gaps, or what did you see?
So he has this magical quality of being both, crazy smart, but also very approachable. And I think his magic as a leader is that he commands the intellectual academic respect of all the brightest scientists in the world. But he's also likable, nice, respectful, easy to be with. It's special.
I know I'm jumping around a bit, but if there's one moment in the book where you're talking about what happens with AlphaGo in March 2016, and it's competing against Lee Sedol. Can you talk us through how solving Go impacts, I guess, humanity more widely in terms of that model and how people chose to respond to it being defeated?
Sure. So Go had been this grand challenge in computer science. It's much harder than chess to solve because it's a 19 by 19 board. So the combinatorial complexity of the Go pieces is much higher than in chess. Humans have played this game for thousands of years, and they thought they had discovered all of the possible stratagems one could bring to bear. And yet along comes this machine and discovers new stratagems that no humans had ever thought of, and starts beating the top human players. And there were two reactions. One was that Lee Sedol, the loser in South Korea, a little bit later retired from Go and said, I have no more pleasure in playing this thing I've devoted my life to because the machine has beaten me, and now it feels futile. The other reaction was, well, it's wonderful. A new depth and beauty in the game, which humans had not discovered, has been revealed to us by the machine. The world is more complicated and beautiful than we realized. Thank you, machine. So there were these different reactions. There's another one, Thor Grapel, who is a Go player, but also a DeepMind computer scientist at the time and worked on the project, described to me, watching the system get stronger as they were incubating it. And at the first, you train the model and it kind of plays okay, and it's sort of trying to imitate good human players. You think that's very sweet. And then it gets, masters all of the human tactics. And you think, oh, aren't we clever, the programmers, because we've taught it to master all the human tactics. And then it starts discarding some human tactics because it realizes they're not as good as humans think, and replacing them with machine-invented tactics that you think, oh, yes, now I see what it's doing. I hadn't thought of that, but that's pretty good. And then the next final level is you start playing against the machine, and it puts its pieces randomly around the board, and it looks totally meaningless. And then after about 50 moves, the pattern of the pieces starts to encircle you, and bit by bit you're being throttled, and you didn't even see it coming. And that is a microcosm for what might happen with powerful AI in the future out of the domain of Go. This guy, Tori Grapel, said to me. So that made me shudder a bit and walk
terrifying.
off. And, yeah.
But I do find it interesting. It's that this thing of some people saying, I'm not going to play it anymore. I'm done. Versus the top chess players now will compete against the machines all the time. But
gets to your theme of purpose, right?
Yeah, and then they get to compete against other humans, which I think is more interesting. But but being augmented by this AI can be exciting.
Yes,
in lots of areas outside of just medical research and the other areas.
I mean, I think so fundamentally humans are quite good at having purpose, right? We need purpose, and those 15-year-old books I read, or I was 15 when I read them, French existentialism and all that told me that life was absurd. Maybe it's absurd, but we are incredibly good at disguising that by waking up in the morning with projects that we want to do. And, the project could be simply that you want to go for a long walk. It could be that you want to do pottery, or it could be you want to go to the gym, whatever it is. We invent purpose for ourselves. And so chess is a great illustration of this. In chess, Deep Blue, the IBM system, beat Garry Kasparov in 1997. So it's almost 30 years. And yet the number of human chess players has gone up. The number of humans who follow professional chess has gone up. Humans are not obsessing about which AI system plays the best chess. They want to know which human plays the best chess. And so I think humans are fascinated by other humans. Humans are good at inventing purpose. we're not going to run out of things to do. We're going to invent new things to do.
Because recently, Demis was asked in an interview, what is it that people aren't talking about, or what's he looking at that people aren't aware of? And he said, look, beyond the economic and the tech stuff around AI, he said philosophically, it's what is the meaning? What's the purpose to consciousness? What does it mean to be human? And he said that's what's occupying a lot of his time. Do you think that's truly what it is, or that's what, sounds good in terms of someone who could be a safe, conscious, custodian of this great technology?
No, look, I think at a high level, that's what he's doing. And he did take that seriously enough to do an entire PhD in neuroscience, which he did from a standing start because his earlier degree was computer science, so he had no background in medicine or psychology or whatever. He basically completely self-taught enough to be admitted to a neuroscience PhD program. In fact, he read all the papers on his honeymoon in Italy on the beach. And on the beach, he had an epiphany about the relationship between memory and imagination, which then led to one of the most cited neuroscience papers of that decade.
So you've spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs, founders, and the rest. And I'm really interested in your view for those and for family offices, people deploying capital and are interested in purpose. How should they be thinking about AI and what it means for decision making now?
You mean decision making as deployers of capital?
Yeah. So there's a number of different ways that we can decide how we want to harness AI in our businesses or what we invest into or elsewhere in our life. Through all this work, have you started to see how you think people who want to be purposeful could potentially use more and more of the AI that's available?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's both a question about which bits of the AI stack you should be investing in. And, there it's not deeply original, but I mean, the hardware stack is the bit with a moat. So all the chip companies, ASML, the engraving lithography company, is an essential part of the supply chain, TSMC. All these companies are in a strong position. We know that. At the foundation model layer, at the moment, it's a commoditized business. It's pretty hard to generate the consumer part of that is pretty generic. So I think it's right that OpenAI has almost 1 billion regular users, but only 5% pay them. So that's still an F business model, as Peter Thiel complained a while ago. You can make money in enterprise with either a foundation model or with sort of a SaaS model where you are, doing AI-driven SaaS. And I think actually the SaaS apocalypse is over hyped.
Really?
Yeah, in the sense that I think that, look, definitely end users, enterprises, want AI-driven tools. But they might get the AI-driven tools from their existing SaaS provider, which will embed the AI tools into the existing software that they're delivering. And if you're a corporation and you trust your SaaS company provider, isn't that the best solution? You don't have to go figure out which model is best to drive the AI engine. You'd rather not rip out the software that you're using. So I think, clearly there'll be winners and losers within SaaS because some will implement AI tools fast. And clearly there'll be, some bits of the SaaS world that, let's say, coding assistants, Anthropic's done very well. But I don't think there's a blanket wipeout for SaaS. And then I guess there's a debate about how you use in your own life as a business leader or an investment professional. How do you use AI? And I think the answer is you just have to experiment. Everybody needs to find, because the tech changes all the time. So anybody who tells you, I know how you should use it, that advice will be out of date in 3 months. So I think we all have to try to be using it continuously so that we discover organically how it's useful to us.
Agreed. We usually ask the same final questions, which are, you work incredibly hard. How do you stay healthy?
I nearly every day do exercise before I start work. Could be Peloton on the sort of easy days, and I find that 20 minutes plus, say, 10 minutes of stretching and massage gun is a good start to the day. When I have a bit more time, I do weights and sort of floor exercises, so that maybe takes an hour. But, I'm 61. If I want to keep the show on the road, this is essential.
Okay. And are you quite monastic and disciplined about when you sit down to write, or can it be very...
Yes, I do like to make my day as clear as possible, because I think for writing, it's very much a flow thing. You have to get deep into it. That takes a little time. So if you just have a 1.5 hour window, you might as well not bother. And if I have some meetings and then there's an hour and a half in between, I tend to do my taxes or do some administrative thing, because writing is just not productive on that basis. When I have a day where, bar a couple of phone calls, it's empty, that's my sweet spot, and I'm happy to work from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. I get up and have a drink or coffee or walk around the block if I need to, but basically I'm in it, and that's nirvana for me.
And you manage to avoid distractions and getting caught by emails and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I'm sort of soft on myself in the sense that if I'm doing the long duration from 9 to 10, it's fine to, sometimes you write a paragraph and it actually is good to do an email or two. And then, you've had a 5-minute break, you go back to what you'd written, you see how to improve it. So I think for me, that's fine. There are sprinters, and then there are kind of steady joggers. I guess I'm a steady jogger.
And the final one, if you could give some advice to a young Sebastian, what would it be?
I think the key with a world where AI is arriving is to do something that you find deeply satisfying, because we don't really know what will be displaced by AI, or if everything will be kind of displaced by AI. It's such an uncertain future, but what we do know is, to go back to the theme of your podcast series, is we need purpose, right? Humans need purpose. And so if you find something deeply satisfying, you've solved that central conundrum. And so I would encourage people to go and find the thing they love.
Wow. Thank you for the books that you've written. I've as I've mentioned to you before, I've loved them. And we met in, I think, 2017, 2018 at Milken, when you just finished Greenspan's book, which is just phenomenal. And The Power of Law was also one of those, I think, defining for a lot of the industry. The new book is great. Thank you for the work that you've done to put it out there, and then for coming and seeing us today.
Thanks, Joe.
All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.